Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And you probably recognize our guest today. We have Kendel again with us. How are you, Kendel?
Hello, doing great. I'm so excited for today's episode. This is like a transcendently important.
Ooh, already like a $4 word right there. So I have to say, whenever we have Kendel on, I always get people like texting me personally and saying, more Kendel. We need more Kendel. Like they really do. Whatever topic you're covering, and we've had you on before. Kendall's a member of the Good Book Club, and he often volunteers to give amazing presentations and will say, oh my gosh, that was so good. Let's talk about this topic on Mormonish. So you guys, if you've been watching along, you've seen a couple different presentations from Kendel, and you always just do such a good job and everybody takes notice. And so I kind of said to Kendel, well, what else do you have? We're always looking for somebody that has something good to share, and you really do. And you brought up a couple different topics, and I'm like, okay, that's good. That's good. But when you mentioned this topic, which was about boundaries, that I was all over, because I'm only recently starting to figure out the whole concept of what a boundary is, what a boundary might have looked like while I was growing up, because I don't think we had any in my LDS household. So it is very interesting to dissect this. So right away, I said, Landon, we're going to have Kendel on to do boundaries. And what did you say, Landon?
I don't remember.
You said, I have a boundary. I'm tired. I'm not doing another podcast. And I said,
I said no, because I'm holding to my boundaries.
That's right. And I said, you can't assert your boundaries on Mormonish. I'm in charge and you will do the podcast. No, we were both really excited. So we're going to let Kendel, he's prepared a wonderful presentation. You can introduce yourself a little bit in case maybe this is the first time that a viewer or listener has even, gotten to know you. And then we'll just dive right into this really interesting topic of boundaries, which is such a wide topic, which so much nuance to it, that I think we're going to do a couple parts on this, because I think it's really important and all encompassing. And if you guys are like me, or maybe my age, you might go, I don't even know what a boundary is. I don't understand what a boundary is. And when you start to dissect your past in terms of boundary, you go, oh crap, I see it now. I did not see it then, and I'm just barely starting to learn. So these kinds of podcasts are really important, and we're excited to have Kendel with us.
They are, and that's really my goal with all of this. As you can see from my slides here, I call this my, getting to reality series, because when I, left the church, I was an institute teacher for a few years. I taught seminary. I thought the church had the answers to everything. And so now that I've left, I'm like, well, what are the real answers? Like, what in reality works the best? Because, say your prayers, go to church, read the scriptures, really doesn't answer my problems. And so that's my mission.
What do you mean? That's the answer to every problem.
That's what I thought. But apparently it doesn't work that way. I was disillusioned to discover. But that's why we talked about in our first episode of you can go through post-traumatic growth. And I'm just loving going through all these books, answering the fundamental questions of life, and getting to the real answers that really work. So that's kind of my approach with this series, is what are the main problems that I thought I could answer with the atonement or with gospel things. And actually, there's a lot better answers out there if you go and look for them. So that's my goal.
Oh, I love that you even have the ability now to explore whatever, whenever you want, because when you're in that structure of high demand, high control, if it doesn't work for you, those answers that supposedly work for everyone else, whose fault is it? It's your own fault. You're doing something wrong. And so you're just trapped in that cycle. You will never get the relief or the answer that you're looking for, and it's your fault. And you just plummet farther and farther in. But on the other side of it, you are free to go anywhere, explore anything, learn anything, watch a podcast anywhere where something might resonate, and it might be the answer that works personally for you. There is no complete right answer. And that is the beautiful thing that you discover on the other side.
Yes, there's so many more options. Like this quote right here, I'm just going to read the end of it. In the 7 2-hour sessions of General Conference, truths were taught, doctrines were expounded, exhortations given, enough to save the whole world from all its ills. And I mean all its ills. I was taught that in, I think I was a deacon when I first heard that, and it stuck with me my whole life. I was like, wow, I got to study General Conference because it answers everything. There's no question that I can't answer or problem that I can have solved that doesn't come from there. So that's why I was like, wow, like you're not going to get Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral reasoning, that would bring all of society to another level of, character and reasoning. You're not going to learn critical thinking. You're never going to hear about vertical versus horizontal morality. You're never going to hear about, systems that'll actually make your life effective, like David Allen's Getting Things Done. Any piece of knowledge that conflicts with the goals of the church is going to be hidden, suppressed, shamed, discredited. I mean, look at the state of therapy if you're a churchgoer. For about 50 years, my parents were like, oh, only sickos and crazies go to therapists. They'll make you worse. They'll mess you up. It's all pseudo crazy stuff. And even right now, I mean, the recent news of like the state of the word intellectual in the church is just,
it's always in quotes, right? Intellectual, right? I was going to say that it looks like Spencer Kimball got his wish back in 1968, because what is the only thing we study now everywhere in church? It's the conference talks. Those are what are given in sacrament meeting. That is what the teachings of the prophets are about. That's what Come Follow Me, references back. That's all we talk about, the words of the living prophet. See, I put living prophet in quotes where other people put intellectual.
I'm trying to remember, when was the last time a conference speaker received a Nobel Prize for solving a world problem?
I'm guessing President Nelson might claim it. There are stories where it didn't exactly happen, and he makes a claim.
This is the church. All talk, no action. They solve all the ward problems in ward council, never leaving the room.
Yeah, and like I said on our first episode, like I was so convinced of this that I created a journal every single general conference since 1970 something, and I would organize the quotes by topic, and thinking, that those would have all the answers. And now I realize, what? The best of the best stuff, the Mormon speakers were just copying from other authors like Henry David Thoreau or other people. Like I was shocked. I was like, this is, I've been hoodwinked.
And 1968, they would have been still telling us that the black shouldn't have the priesthood in conference talks.
Get your own planet, all that stuff. There were no rock and a hat. Yep, totally different.
Okay, but we're actually going to help people today. We're actually going to solve your problems. It won't be easy. Like that's part of the benefit of the church. The church kind of makes the world a lot more simple, a lot more black and white. This is going to help you, but I'm not going to say it's easy. It's going to be, you're going to have to go through some growth. But anyway, so all these things will be addressed today. So does anyone in the audience today suffer from any of these? Burnout, unbalanced relationships, anxiety, lack of fulfillment, any of those things, being exhausted, overloaded, constantly anxious, like all of that can largely be attributed to poor boundaries.
Really? I had no idea. I thought that was just a natural state of life, right? You're burnt out, anxious, stressed out.
That describes my everyday existence.
It does, Landon.
Yeah, so these are some visual representations of what it feels like to have poor boundaries. So just people walking all over you, just a lot of weight and unnecessary invasion of your personal space. And it really eats into your life and your self-care and your sense of identity. So we're gonna correct a lot of that today.
No, I love that. For those of you that are just listening, there were a kid in a car seat with a dog sitting its butt right on his face, and another kid laying down and a dog draped around it, and a woman with a cat right in her face. I can relate to that. So, yep, great visuals on what it means to not have the boundaries you need.
Yeah, so this comes from the book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace. It's reasons people don't respect your boundaries. So you don't take yourself seriously, you don't hold people accountable, you apologize too much, you allow too much flexibility, you speak in uncertain terms, or think that if you gossip around, it'll get back to the person and you'll solve your problems that way instead of being direct. You haven't actually verbalized your boundaries. They're all in your head and you convey them through vagueness or, playing games. You assume that stating your boundaries once is enough. You assume that people will figure it out based on how you act when they violate a boundary. and you put the responsibility for your boundaries on others, like this clip shows.
Do not touch this. This is a no touching zone. Good. Well then. Oh my God! I can't believe you reached across like that again. I can't even believe it. Don't cross this line.
So there's better ways. Landon, would you read this? This comes from the same book.
Avoidance is a passive-aggressive way of expressing that you are tired of showing up. Hoping the problem will go away feels like the safest option, but avoidance is a fear-based response. Avoiding a discussion of our expectations doesn't prevent conflict. It prolongs the inevitable task of setting boundaries. Prolonging issues by avoiding them means the same issue will reappear over and over again, following us from relationship to relationship.
Yeah, so a lot of people are afraid of this topic. I personally am too. Like, there are consequences to conversations, but the alternative is worse on almost all cases. Just by avoiding it, you're not solving anything. In most cases, you're making it far worse.
Boy, Kendel, I have to say already you're describing a lot of my personality traits. This is terrible. I do that all the time. Don't completely give a straight answer just because I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, or I don't want to assert what I want. I hem and I haw, and it leaves the conversation with the person going, that was so wishy-washy. I don't really know what you mean. And I'm like, next time we'll really talk about it. But I'm very guilty of that. Very guilty.
Yeah, and there are, pro-social reasons for that. You don't want to make them feel embarrassed.
Right.
You want to preserve your relationships. Every dysfunction, this is something I learned in my deconstruction early on. Every dysfunction we have serves us in some way. We gain some benefit from the wrong way of doing things. And I'm gonna tell you, when it comes down to, the moment to set boundaries, there's a step in there that you really have to count the cost and how much it's worth setting the boundary versus the relationship versus, how ready and self-aware and mature the audience is, the other party. So there's lots of factors that go into it. It's not necessarily bad to do what you're saying, but just what's more important to you. You really have to understand yourself and your needs and your priorities. Okay, so I've taught this a few times, and there's a lot of misconceptions about boundaries. So I wanted to just start off with this: what boundaries are not. So they are not selfish, although they can be if they go too far. They're not one-sided demands that govern others' behavior. That's probably the number one misconception. People learn about boundaries and they're like, this is a way to get others to do what I want. And okay, you can use it that way, but the healthy way is to honor yourself as you honor others. That's the golden ratio, the ideal for boundaries. They're not threats attached to vague expectations. They can have consequences to specific behavior. They're not the same for everyone. There's no, one way to do boundaries. They're not intended to punish, put up walls, create conflict. Don't use them that way, or don't think of them that way. Yes, sometimes you have to put up walls, but they have windows and doors and ways to be invited into the shared safe space. They're not a means to get your way all the time or an excuse to not care about others. Again, it's not about controlling or enabling. As we'll see, the most fundamental foundation of boundaries contemplates and considers others. You can't blame others for your problems. They're not a way to continue behavior that is maladaptive, unreasonable, or toxic. So, you set a boundary on others so you don't have to deal with the problem. It's not that, although, a lot of people are tempted to use it that way. And then finally, it's not a way to avoid confronting bad behavior that benefits you. So like we said earlier, avoiding an uncomfortable conversation. Like they confront you about something you really need to change, and then you're like, oh, we're putting up a boundary. I'm not talking about this. Like, that's not what this is about. You need to adjust your behavior as well, as we'll see, within certain contexts. So any thoughts or things that stand out to you about this list?
To me, a means to get your way all the time, that's clearly not a boundary, that's withholding sex. So that one stuck out.
Yes, very context dependent. Although, in a few books I read, I actually read Boundaries in Marriage. And that's one of the things is like often in couple contexts that comes up a lot of like, oh, I'm tired, I don't want this. And you just have to respect that. And, it really is a negotiation about, okay, like we had certain expectations, we both have certain needs. How can we honor the other person while at the same time honoring ourselves? It's not just about ourselves. That is selfishness.
Yeah, this is a great list because, again, I think if you ask anybody what's a boundary, you're going to get a different answer from every person. And so each one of these really makes you think and think about different scenarios where this might be something that maybe someone has tried to impose on you, or you thought about, I'm going to impose that on someone else. So this is great. What are they not? I think is just as important as what are they.
It really is. Yeah. Like I said, I had to read my first book on boundaries by Henry Cloud 3 times before I really got this, because it's easily missed in the Mormon context where it's all about, recognition and hierarchy and stewardship and power, like who's your superior? Where do you get your orders from? We stand whenever a general authority enters the room. Like we defer so much. And we need to get away from that mindset. We are authorities of our own lives. But it's not about controlling others. It's a means of creating a mutually safe and satisfying space for ourselves and for others to be invited into that space. Again, that's the idea. All right, so this is a great video by Emotional Badass about what is not a boundary. So just to recap.
This sounds like a boundary, but isn't. This is for the person who needs to get clear about boundaries. Hey, so-and-so, I don't want you to say that anymore because it hurts my feelings. That is not a boundary. Our boundaries are about what we can control. Here's a boundary. If you keep saying that, I'm going to cut this meeting short. That's a boundary because it's what I can control. Boundaries are not trying to exert a control over somebody else's speech, their behavior, their actions, their energy, their clothing. That is not a boundary. Those are control issues. Our boundaries are about what we can control. If you say that again, I'm going to leave. That's a boundary.
But the first time people encounter this, that's at least at the time, Mormon mind went to. Is like, oh, this is a way to guilt people, to shame people, to get them to do what I want them to do. But really, we all know this. We can't control others. We can only control ourselves. Boundaries are a means to have the space of our lives be something that we are okay with. And what we will do when something we're not okay with happens. It sounds so simple, but I'm here to tell you, there's a lot of misconceptions on this topic. And that in essence is what it is. We'll give a formal definition a little bit later, but any thoughts as to what we have right now?
I was just going to say, this reminds me of, there's a movie, I think we might have even seen it together, Landon. Was it called Speak No Evil? I think that might have been what it was called, but it was about boundaries. It was about a couple that made friends with another couple and were invited, for a week-long stay out in a villa. And just step by step, this other couple did things that were way out of line with the boundary. Oh, we just took your daughter off to the store. We didn't think you'd mind. You didn't know. And you could just see the one couple going, well, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you talk yourself out of, telling somebody, no, that is not okay. And that was a boundary and you crossed it. And of course, the movie turns into a horror movie, but it just shows how far people will go to gaslight themselves and say, they didn't mean it. It's okay. It's really not happening, until something is so extreme that you have to recognize it. So when I think about boundaries like that, I think for myself, I talk myself out of even seeing that there might be a problem, because like you say, socially, it can be awkward to have those confrontations. So for me, I would rather just say, I'm sure they didn't mean that, or I'm sure that wasn't what it was, and just kind of move on. But then it will happen again. That's just what happens if you don't address it like you just addressed. So that's kind of my thought, that people, I think we're hardwired as human beings just to kind of excuse people and maybe take it, you know what I mean? The bad feelings or whatever comes from that, until finally it's just too much. And then perhaps you instigate a boundary that's excessive because it's been building up kind of. But yeah, that was an interesting movie. It was so uncomfortable the whole time because what the other couple was doing was just out of the realm of, you don't do this with someone else's kids, or you don't ask a couple who's staying with you to do this, and you see the husband and wife look at each other like, I guess it's okay. You just talk yourself out of it. So yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, you really nailed the core problem, which is we're socialized, at least I was socialized, to be people pleasers and to say yes and not to own our power. Like we don't belong to an organization that is like, yeah, we should empower people to state what they want and do what they want. No, that's not righteous. So
that's not how a theocracy works.
Yeah, so we're gonna go over each of those reasons. Oh, Landon, did you have something to say?
No, I agree that when you're raised in the church, you're taught to, you never want to give offense because someone might not come back to church. You always got to appear to be happy and polite and all of that. And if you say no to someone, you're not being polite. You want them to see you as this nice person, so they'll want to hear the gospel. And so you oftentimes do not stand up for yourself. You rather go along to get along, and that's poor boundaries.
Yep. So we're going to go through some of the reasons I have observed that I think contributes to this state of where we find ourselves. So again, just being members of the church, you can disagree, but I think we were socialized to say that to be a good person, to be a good member, to be a good member of the church, you have to be a follower. Like that's kind of part of my core identity. I follow the prophet. I follow our leaders. We don't question that. We don't say, hey, I feel uncomfortable. I feel this isn't right. Like there is no culture to do that. If you do that, there is something wrong with you. Like I remember the few times that I really had a problem with like the way one of my, bishops or leaders would do something. And, they never do it in public. There's no public forum to have a debate about things. You take them in one-on-one. It would be the authority and you in their office alone. And it would center around, Kendel, are you reading your scriptures enough? Are you going to the temple enough? Like that, this is a problem. You shouldn't speak out against your leaders. Like they would turn it around as if the problem was with me. And I was like, hey, I just want to talk about ideas here.
Now, I think on a global scale, an example of that is the November 5th policy, right? A lot of people inherently were really upset by that and wanted to speak out against it. But again, exactly what you said, Kendel, you just are a follower. So you don't say anything, you kind of swallow it, or you might go talk to your bishop like you did, Landon, about that exact issue. And they say that exact thing, didn't they, Landon, to you?
Yeah, and I think, blacks in the priesthood is a thing that bothered a lot of people, that the blacks weren't allowed to received the priesthood, and I know for BYU professors especially, there were a lot of them that were against that. Yet you can't stand up for it. You can't say anything. You just accept it rather than say, no, this is a boundary. Church, you don't get to do this to people, and stand up for the belief that you actually have, even when it's something that bothers you that much. You still say, well, I can't speak out about it, and you don't stand up for your boundaries.
Exactly. And again, like it goes to our identity. Like I want to be a good person, and a good person doesn't, rock the boat. I mean, I think there was a specific talk where a general authority said that, don't rock the boat.
Stay in the boat, don't get out of the boat, don't rock the boat. There's so many boats in Mormonism.
Totally. We're always taught to consider others, put others first, be serviceful. What would Jesus do? People pleasing. I started to make a list of all these people pleasing, rules that I was given growing up. Like, especially we were talking before, Rebecca, about how this is kind of worse for women. Yeah. And that was the first thing I thought of is at BYU, the women were taught you have to say yes to a first date. It's just a rule. You just have to be, go along to get along, people pleasing, kind, nice, smile, even if you feel inwardly like, no, I don't want to do this. But I mean, I was socialized to the point where like, I'm actually doing exercises with a meetup group about self-empowerment. And we're doing exercises where it's like, say no, even though like it's a pretty reasonable thing. Like just practice saying no, and they really hone in on like, see how uncomfortable that word is. You need to get comfortable with it. It's normal to say no, like to big things, to little things. Just get used to saying no. And, my journey out of the church is, in my second year now. And I'm like, wow, it is still so hard. That word no still catches in my throat. I feel like I'm being selfish, like the first misconception we talked about.
It's easier to text it. In fact, this is actually funny. We were going to start taping this podcast a little bit earlier. I was late for work, getting home from work to get ready. So I texted Kendel. I said, hey, I'm a little bit late. Can we start 10 minutes late? And I was just kind of glancing at my phone, and it looked like he wrote back, no. And I was like, wow, well, way to go, Kendel, enforcing your boundaries. I'm going to hurry and just eat something real quick and get ready. Then I looked closer and he'd written NP, no problem. But for a minute there, Kendel, I'm like, he is a badass man. He is just saying no. But I want to share one thing, what you said about BYU. This is so true. And often it's your leaders, even if you do try to assert a boundary, your leaders in the church, in this case, BYU, who stop you. I was in a ward once. We were in an apartment, and there was a guy that would come over all the time and ask for hugs. He wanted each one of us to hug him. He would be very aggressively walking up to us, wrapping his arms around us. He was socially very awkward, and we were extraordinarily uncomfortable. We were trying to be nice. We'd give him a little hug, but he came over every day. Where's my hug? And it was a hug where, it was not good. So we went to the bishop collectively as roommates. We said, look, we're really uncomfortable with this is happening. He's asking to hug us. He's really hugging us for an extended period of time. It's not comfortable. It means something different to him than us. Do you think you could talk to him? That was a boundary. I mean, that was big for us. Like, we let him do it for like a month before we finally said, you know what, we can't do this anymore. And the bishop said, oh, he's lonely and he's a little socially awkward. What does it hurt you guys to just give him a little hug now and then when he asks, right? So no help there. So at that point we had to, keep an eye out, shut the door, but it was hard for us to go in there and say that as women, we don't like this. And we got no support or help.
Right. There's something unchristlike about disappointing someone.
He's your brother in the gospel. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's never about you and what you're comfortable with. Like, who's serving me and caring about what makes me comfortable. No. That never got brought up.
No, never did.
And we're explicitly taught obedience. Obedience is the first law of heaven, like always accept callings, just all these rules where it's like, don't think, just salute and shut up.
What's interesting? I just came to this kind of epiphany and realization just a little while ago. I've talked before. I have a good friend who is perhaps stepping a little bit away from the church because of different circumstances. And the first thing that she said is, I'm not going to accept any calling. And then I realized I've heard that so often from people that confide in me or text me. That's like a first step where people say, I'm just going to create that boundary. I'm uncomfortable at church, or I'm having questions. I'm just not going to accept a calling right now while I sort it out. That's kind of how they justify it. But it really is a boundary, isn't it? Right there, you're saying, I am going to say no to something for now while I'm trying to figure it out. The next thing that people usually arrive at is, I am no longer going to pay tithing in the way that they're telling me. I'm going to, start giving to my own charities. So again, a boundary that you all of a sudden are saying, I'm not going to have that, across the board obedience. I'm going to take back some autonomy. But it's interesting to me, no calling and difference in paying tithing. And I've heard that many, many times from people that reach out to me.
Yeah, it really is a fundamental shift in how you view yourself. Like, in the church, if you're a good member, you literally just follow the script, do all these expectations. But as you realize, no, if I don't feel this is right, I have other options, and you take back your power and you feel more authentic, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Were you going to say something, Landon?
Yeah. Someone on Reddit just recently posted screenshots of a text conversation they had with someone in the bishopric who said, Sister so-and-so, can you come in to meet with the bishop? And she said, regarding, and he said, a calling. And she said, well, I just had twins and I am dealing with stage 4 cancer right now, or something like. I'm not sure about.
I think one of the kids had cancer. There were a lot of issues at home. Like, it was overwhelming.
Listed them all and said, I don't think a calling is a good thing right now. Immediately it was, oh, I'm sure the Lord will bless you if you accept the calling.
She pushed back. I mean, it became a series of screenshots where they literally almost got in a fight because I don't think the leader had ever encountered somebody that was being completely honest. No, it doesn't work for me. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to serve my family, you know. And even though you're saying it very nicely to them, it's like,
and that's the problem in the church. They won't accept no
They
for an
won't accept
answer.
it.
Even if you say no, they won't accept your answer. It's like,
they have all these
not
built-in
accepting it.
answers of like, you know, where's your faith? Or
Uh-huh.
the Lord will magnify you. How many times was I told that?
Or they just don't accept it. Like, remember, Landon, how I left my calling? I texted them. I said, I'm not coming back. That was my first step to take back some autonomy. COVID happened, of course. Then like a year and a half later, someone texted me, hey, you know, we need somebody at the primary piano. Could you, you're still on the roll as being one of the primary pianists. I'm like, I am. I literally have a podcast. I don't think so. I mean, that's another thing. You just ignore someone's boundary completely and keep asking.
Yep. I put on here just like previous generations, their values, you know, it emphasized silence, deference, especially to authority, compliance, projecting a good public image. The author Natalie Liu actually says from 1940 till about 2000, if you were born anywhere in there, like you were kind of taught this deference and compliance with anyone that's an authority, anyone that's, you know, a senior member of the family. You just kind of go along with what they say and you keep silence. It's just this unspoken rule of how things work.
That makes me think of Rebecca's story of when her parents removed her door to her bedroom.
Yeah.
Never
No,
put
that,
it
and
back
I
on.
thought about that when I said, oh, we're going to talk about boundaries today. I don't know if I have any boundary stories. And then Landon's like, you have the ultimate boundary story. And that was, I've told it before, when I was a teenager, I had a boy over. We were listening to like My Turn on Earth or an Osmond record in my room with the door, you know, not all the way shut, but shut a little bit. And when I came home from school the next day and from high school, my door was gone completely. Even the, you know, the hinges, everything was gone. I never thought to ask what happened. My parents never told me what happened. I mean, I assumed it had something to do with having a boy over in my room. I never thought to ask for the door back. I never had a door for the rest of high school, ever. I just
For
lived
years
with it.
you had no door on
I
your
had no
bedroom.
bedroom door. Exactly. No, and I never thought what to say to them. Hey, why'd you take my door? Where is my door? I'm 16. I need a door.
I dress in this room. This is an
Well, you know,
unacceptable boundary. I need a door.
This was the era where the parents walk around in the one pieces, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about. So, you know, but yeah, it was, I just never thought. And that's how little I considered any kind of boundary for myself. I didn't know that I could make one or have one. I was completely enacted upon, which I think a lot of women my age raised in the 70s and 80s. I think that's just our role. The door may be a little extreme, but yes, we found the door eventually when we sold the house 3 years ago. It was down in a laundry room behind the washer and dryer, and we put it up so we could sell the house. But I had no door. I did hang some
45
beads.
years.
I hung some beads though. I did. My grandparents had gone on a mission to Tonga and they sent back some shells, like a curtain. So I did hang some groovy love beads. So that was okay. But yeah, don't ask, don't tell. Never ask what happened. Never assert a boundary if I need my door back. You just don't.
But yeah, your preferences, your wants, your needs, your boundaries, they were all subordinate. Other people were superior. They would tell you how to feel and how to act and what was going to happen. And there was no debate. That's disrespectful to your elders. So, yep.
Yeah.
I'm putting on here judgments. It's kind of an amalgamation of everything we've talked about. But like for me, I always felt like whenever I would say like, oh, like I don't like this. I want to say no. I don't want to do this. I would feel bad. And I would convince myself, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. That's bad. Anger is bad. Selfishness is bad. Speaking up for myself and not giving everyone what they want is bad. And I want to be good.
Talking
and so
down
I would
at the
judge
brethren,
myself.
disagreeing with the brethren, that's bad. Yep.
Yeah, there's something wrong with me. Am I not strong in my testimony? Am I not sustaining my leaders, you know, like supporting them? Like what's wrong with me? Like it would just go back to me and I would self-police whenever I would even, you know, approach something like a boundary. Like I really didn't have any conception. I was the worst people pleaser you could imagine for most of my life until very recently, actually.
I love that idea of practicing saying no, though. Like, can you give us an example of a small thing that you would like what you did today when I said, hey, is it okay if we start 10 minutes later, which anyone would say yes to? And I thought you said no.
You know,
What
I
kinds of things
actually
do you
have a hard
practice?
time. I have a hard time thinking of it because I usually want to say yes. That is
Exactly.
actually still my personality, but just like, you know, I'm doing some legal battles with someone, some personal problems, and I really feel good finally for the first time in my life being like, you know, that is completely unreasonable.
Mhm.
And even though, you know, I like to give you what you ask for, like this is just the answer is no. Like you are being totally unreasonable. You haven't even asked my preferences. You haven't even given me the information I need to make a decision. And I'm willing to go to court over it. Like I have rights too. So I don't want to give details because it is
Yeah,
personal,
no, you don't
but
have
that's one
to.
context.
Yeah, but just to be able to say for once what's on your mind, and then and maybe some of you who are listening or viewing are like, I don't understand that. I can always say, you know, what I think, but for those of you that do understand, it can be debilitating in a way because you never really get exactly what you want, and you tend to put things off and it comes back again, you know. Just to be able to finally say, you know, very decisively no, or that's not going to work, or I'm not going to do that, and then it's gone. You've said it, you've made it clear, you know. But I think a lot of us also have problems thinking we were clear, and then we weren't. The person will go, I didn't really get that from you. And I'm like, are you kidding? I was as clear as I could be, but that wasn't clear enough. So it's a skill. It really is. And I know people that have no problem and they'll just say it. But I know more people that are more like me, where they're just kind of, well,
Yeah, it really is a spectrum, and a lot
yeah,
of it
it's a
does
spectrum.
depend on personality. But I really do think there's a trend within the church to be more compliant
Oh,
and a yes man and a people pleaser.
yep.
That's just my personal opinion. But me, upon distancing myself to the church, it sounds dumb, and I really am. I have such people pleasing, poor tendencies still, even with all this knowledge. I'm doing so much better, but that's not quite the same as good or excellent. But really, the number one thing that differentiates Mormon Kendel with post-Mormon Kendel is I ask myself before I make a decision or before I say yes to something. I know most people do this naturally already, but for me, it is totally radically new. And that is, I ask myself, what does Kendel want? And I
WWKD. What would Kendall
yeah,
do?
exactly. And it sounds so minor and so dumb, but for me, it's revolutionary because I really did have just a knee-jerk reaction to give them what they want and to just go along to get along and say yes and please people. And I didn't want to disappoint people. And now I'm like, okay, I'm not always going to say yes. I'm going to check in with
Mhm.
myself first. That's my rule. And it's gone fantastically. I mean, we're going to go into the consequences because a lot of people don't like this. Oh, well, you said yes to everything before. I don't like this new Kendall,
Yeah.
but we're going to get into that. But just on the topic of like the church and, you know, disagreeing with teachings and leaders and, you know, even, you know, talks and stuff, I want to read this quote. So I was a seminary and institute teacher for a number of years, and this was given to me in my training to become a teacher. This is Bruce R. McConkie, but it's in their pre-service institute manual. And it says, every truth in every field in all the earth and in all eternity is in complete and total harmony with every other truth. Truth is always in harmony with itself. The word of the Lord is truth, and no scripture ever contradicts another, nor is any inspired statement of any person out of harmony with an inspired statement of another person. Paul and James did not have differing views on faith and works, and everything Alma said about the resurrection accords with section 76 of the Doctrine and Covenants. Here's the key part, okay? Here's the thing that tortured me as an intellectual in the church. I really had to suppress this instinct to try to figure stuff out, to ask questions, because here's the last sentence. Whenever we find seeming conflicts, it means we have not as yet caught the full vision of the points involved.
Well, there you go. It's
Always
back
on
on
us.
you, always.
Always back on the victim. Yep. If I was confused, if I was like, hey, this scripture says one thing, this scripture says the other thing, Brigham Young said this, the modern prophet says the opposite. Like, what's going on here? No, there's no contradiction. You have to find a mental gymnastics way to make it work. And if you don't, then you're not inspired. Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, Mormons means more good, but it's a victory for Satan. How do we justify Hinckley's statements to Nelson's statements that are complete opposites of each other? But it's your fault if you can't do that.
Yeah, that really did a number on my mental health. I thought I was crazy, and I had all these things. I had a whole section of my journal of like things that I want to ask about in the next life because they sure don't make sense in this life.
Now there's a podcast. Bring that journal, Kendel, and we'll go through it.
Oh yeah, that would be a whole episode.
Wouldn't that be interesting? Yeah.
I was a thinker, and I thought through some of these things, and I'm like, this does not make sense. I'm pretty sure of that. Oh gosh. But yeah, all these messages stay with us from childhood. Like they build a home, and they actually, there's a part of the brain, the basal ganglia, that doesn't differentiate between helpful and unhelpful behavior patterns. So if we were taught this as kids, we went over in our first episode together, the high level that it really takes to question our beliefs and change our behavior. And so most of these things that we were given as kids, we take with us into adulthood. That's why we have poor boundaries. It's just ingrained in us, and it takes so much pain and conflict and badness for us to ever reconsider our approach to boundaries. Yeah, just one final point. I just want to consider the word selfless for a moment. Like, that was a huge buzzword in the church. Be selfless. But now on the other side, I'm like, wow, they are literally teaching you to disassociate yourself. Like, that is what that means. Like, do not know yourself, do not assert yourself, do not even know your wants and needs, because that has potential to be bad and not good and not go along with what others want of you. Like, wow.
That is mind-blowing. I've never seen that. And you're right. We hear the word be selfless all the time. But I think that's what I was trying to say at the beginning when I said I didn't even know that I had the right to have any kind of boundary or something that would be good for myself. I never knew that was something I could even consider. Like you said, do a check-in. What would be best for me? That's being selfless. You are not connected at all to yourself. You are here to obey others, to help others, to meet others' needs first. And, you will probably get some satisfaction out of doing a lot of that, especially if you're trained in this way, that's what you're supposed to do. But you never do a self-check to say, what would actually be best for me? And that can be from a small thing to a really huge, important thing. And it gives you a lot to think about.
Life's most important decisions. I mean, you look at, who you married. The church tells you, well, she needs to, have a testimony of the gospel. She needs to, want to be a stay-at-home mom. She needs to, they give you this list of qualities you're supposed to be looking for in the person you're going to marry. And how many of us say, well, that's not what I want.
Nope.
I want someone who, loves to go out and be a partner in crime and get in a little trouble. I like somebody who dresses sexy. I want somebody, you don't get to say that because you got to follow you're supposed to forget about what you want and do what they want. And that is, that's going to result in the wrong thing in the end. I think
Absolutely.
Kendel,
I have
same
a few
thing.
stories about
exactly.
that. Like I dated someone, and she had some red flags, but I justified being like, no, even if she does this and this, like, she's just so dedicated to the gospel. She goes to 2 different institutes. She must be.
Oh my goodness.
And oh my gosh, I don't want to get personal, but I could tell you stories.
Yeah.
But anyway,
you never know what you want. You're never trained to do it.
Yeah,
that's the most important
I
thing.
didn't know how to prioritize because I was just socialized with like the gospel overrides everything.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
Well,
and I made decisions based off that. I didn't know what I truly wanted.
Our whole life plan was given to us by the church. You're you're going to graduate from high school, go on a mission, then you're going to come home. You're supposed to enroll in college so that you can get a good job that you can pay tithing with. You're supposed to get married within the first year of coming home. Then you're supposed to pump out a ton of children. Then you're supposed to have a bunch of grandkids. And then you're supposed to leave them and go on a senior mission or 2 or 3. And then you die, and you're supposed to get buried in the church and have them give your funeral so they can tell everyone to be the same, to do the same thing that you just did.
That's the covenant path right there,
That's
Landon.
the covenant
My
path.
whole life flashed before my eyes.
Yeah, there's no other options. This is what you do. There's a path laid out for you, and you never once say, you know what, that's not what I want. I may want to go off and sell the world and be a pirate. I don't know, sell the world on a sailing ship and be single my whole life because that's no way to have a family, but I love the sea, What's wrong with that if that's what you want?
Yeah, and if religion is true, I mean, what better good can there be than, getting in touch with what makes you truly happy? But they do the opposite. They're like, these things will make you happy. Don't think about it, just do it. And then you're like on step 4 or 5 and you realize, hey, I'm not happy. Is there something wrong with me? So that's why we have,
but now I've got 12 kids, so I can't make a change.
Yeah.
Yep. Antidepressants, 12 kids. Yeah.
It's a vicious cycle. Like I didn't know about the word scrupulosity until I was deconstructing, but I did. I had this great what's the word? Cognitive dissonance about, why are the most obedient, the most righteous people in the church the least happy? They're the most hard on themselves. Like, what is that about? And it's because, there's so much expected, and they're the ones that care the most about meeting those expectations. But, we're all at the end of the day just humans that could never measure up, but they were so cognizant of how they didn't measure up that the best among us felt the worst. And it just broke my heart. I was in that group, like I only tried to do what the church wanted me to do. And I was just so hard on myself, and I, was killing myself with stress. Very, very poor boundaries. Okay. So yeah, we just talked about this. Landon nailed this. Rebecca, will you read this?
Yeah, it says the ability to evaluate evidence, to notice bias as it kicks into gear, to consider a variety of perspectives, even if they make you uncomfortable, and then to render what you believe to be true for now is the heart of the critical thinking task. It's really tough to do with your own family because your childhood beliefs are often the most familiar and undetected. Critical thinking requires that we question each of our own ideas. And this is Julie Bogart and Barbara Oakley in Raising Critical Thinkers. Yeah, that is hard to do.
It is. Yeah. But we were taught the opposite. Don't question, believe, just believe, have faith. But the first step to deconstructing these poor boundary habits and our unconscious biases and beliefs about, what's good and what's right in relationships and our boundaries is to question, like, why am I doing this? Do I really want this? Is this really good? Does this really align with what I want out of life? Or should I be, more like a pirate?
Now we know Landon's secret dream. Well, I always thought, I kind of relegated myself to primary, like the last 20 years of my time in the church. Last 20 years. Oh my gosh. Because I figured that was kind of safe. And the more time I spent there, the more I kind of realized that's where all of this indoctrination and everything starts. Really little, like 18 months, and I had this epiphany. I went, while I was still in the church, I went to see a famous Buddhist monk who had come to Salt Lake, and a group of us went, and he had a translator there. And the first thing he said as we sat there, some on the floor and some in chairs, he goes, sit open to listen and to learn and to, take what you want and think critically, basically, sit open with your arms out and listen. And it just struck me that when I'm in primary, the first thing they make the kids do is just close everything from your arms to your head, to your body, till you're just crunched up. Even your posture says, I'm just going to receive what you're saying. I'm not thinking, and then after that, it just broke my heart every time I went to primary. And the leaders would say, I'm not going to do anything until you're all bowing your heads and folding your, and all the little kids were closed up, where really they should be outside catching butterflies, and learning the things that they want to learn. So it starts really young. And that's why that last line in the quote, it's very difficult to move past that when that's what you've known for decades.
Yep, it's the air we breathe, like what's that YouTube video of like, tells the story of two fish and like a senior fish comes up to him and is like, how's the water? And one of them's like, what's water?
Exactly.
It's just, we don't
Yep.
even have the capacity to detect it. Okay. So again, just kind of how we're socialized. This comes from page 94 of the book Boundaries by Henry Cloud. Many people cannot say, I love you, and I do not want to do that. Such a statement does not make sense to them. They think that love means to always say yes. It is not love to withhold your true mind out of fear. But, that's what we're socialized to think. So let's see. I think I have this quote
Lou
later
was
on.
only 28 years old when she
yeah, so the most common resistance we get is fear of not meeting up to that expectation. But here's the truth. You cannot, this comes from Natalie Liu again, from The Joy of Saying No. It's actually not a direct quote, it's a paraphrase. Here's the truth. You cannot continue suppressing your own principles, priorities, and preferences, being good, in other words, and not have your physical and mental well-being take a hit, let alone your hopes and dreams for the future. Chronic people-pleasing cannot coexist with authenticity or joy. As adults, then, we must disentangle ourselves from this outdated and detrimental conditioning. The more we wriggle out of that web, the freer we become, the freer to live in alignment with what feels right and true for us. We don't have to worry about, being condemned or being disobedient or whatever. Instead of being on autopilot, now is the time. We're on a journey. This is the one life we get, I believe. And we have to make the most of it. And the first step is taking our power back and saying, you know what? I want this. This is important to me. And just a fundamental shift that I'm making. It's still to this day very hard, but I tell myself almost every day, my desires, my preferences, they're at least equal to anyone else's. And it's a big shift. It's hard for me to say because I really thought that I had to serve others. My purpose was for something higher than me, and I had to always be serving or I was not, righteous.
Well, you were taught that you represented the church, and therefore everything you did had to always be in alignment with the church, and you had to be a representative of them. And that you learned that right from when you were 19 and had to put on, now 18, when you had to put on that white shirt and you had to wear a name tag. I believe to this day the reason they make you wear that name tag is because they want you to always feel like you represent the church first, not yourself. You wear that for several years, and then you always think, oh, people are watching me. They're seeing what I look like. They're seeing what I do as a member of the church. So even when you take that name tag off, by the time you take it off, it's ingrained within you that
burned into your flesh.
That I have to look like I'm representing the Lord at all times. And the biggest freeing moment when I left Mormonism was when I started saying, you know what? I don't care what that person thinks of me. It doesn't matter what they think of me. What matters is what I think of me. And that is so freeing that, because so often they see, well, he's not going to church. What's he doing? And I'm like, I don't care what they think I'm doing,
I'm a pirate.
Yeah, I'm a pirate. Whatever they think I'm doing is probably way more exciting than what I'm actually doing. So.
We wouldn't put it past you, Landon. I remember a conversation you and I had where you had gone to the gym and you said that you saw a senior couple there with their name tag on their gym clothes. And we talked about how, what does it take for a grown adult, has had jobs, has had kids, has had family, yet they put this thing on them to go do something like that, and then I started to notice senior couples everywhere wearing them. And you're absolutely right. It's this identity that they have taken on, and there it is. And they're not going to take it off.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember one of the huge reliefs of my entire life is every time I got on the plane as a member, I was just absolutely, socialized to be like, you have
Have
to
to talk.
share the
Oh,
gospel. Like if you
gosh.
don't do that, you are just, this terrible human that like gave up someone's chance of eternal salvation. It's all on you. And just that pressure, because I did feel like I represented the church first. And I'm so glad you said it that way, because I didn't really think about it that way, but that's what was going on. I wasn't, it wasn't about what I wanted. I had to share. It was my duty. And I was ingrained with this high sense of duty of what the church wanted out of me before what I wanted out of me. I'm a terrible introvert. Like to speak up to a stranger is asking a lot of me. And I just hated that, but I would do it because that was what it was expected of me.
And I'd say it goes beyond. It wasn't your duty. It's your identity. It had become your identity. You were the church at all times and in all places. And
Every member a missionary. Yeah.
every member a missionary. You were always going, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get out of going to the bar when the company's all going to the bar afterwards? How am I going to not order coffee when that's all they have at the luncheon? All of those things are always going in your mind because that's your identity. It becomes your identity, and that's a hard thing to escape.
Well, you're a representative of Christ. They tell us that all the time, and if it's not your church telling that, it's your family. My mom was the only convert in her entire family. And so we would go visit grandparents in the Midwest. And my parents were the kind that would always make us go to church. We'd have to drive sometimes an hour to find one, in the Midwest, some little church. I was extraordinarily shy and I did not want to go. I didn't want to go to people I didn't know. I was really scared of doing this. And so I remember one Sunday I said out loud in front of my relatives who were not members, because my mom's the only Mormon. I said, I don't want to go, Mom, and I meant because I'm so scared. Oh boy, she took me in a room. She told me, you don't ever say that in front of my relatives. You're a Mormon. They have to know you love it. They have to know you want to go. You have to be an example, and I couldn't even express what I'm trying to say is I'm like 9 years old and I'm terrified. I don't want to go to primary with kids I don't know. I don't want to go to the scary little branch, but it was that idea. Your church tells you to represent, your family tells you to represent. And this line right here where it says your own principles, priorities, and preferences, or fears or anxieties, none of it matters. And
how many 18-year-old boys would want, if they could raise their hand and there was no pressure and no outside influence, would want to wear a white shirt and tie and go tell people about Jesus and hold a book up and go, I love this book.
Or make a TikTok. I love the book, right? Have we all seen those? Yeah.
Yeah. No one would go if it wasn't for the extreme pressure that becomes your own priorities and own preferences because you're trying to please your community. You're not doing it because this is the great desire of your heart. It's because everyone else is doing it, and this is how I please my community, and that's why you do it.
This is the script you were given of how to live your life. You're just following the script. And what's the archetypal, like, number one shared story about missionary work? Gordon B. Hinckley, that letter from his dad. And what's the moral of it? Forget yourself and get lost in the work. That's the whole point of that story.
Now I'm going to be on high alert for all those kinds of phrases used in different ways. Forget yourself, be selfless, let yourself go. It's telling you to lose connection to, again, your principles, priorities, preferences, everything. It's making you disconnect. Wow.
Yeah, I know the word cult is a loaded term. High demand religion is probably more appropriate. But if you go through the BITE model, this is devastating against the church. This type of thing. It really should raise some red flags to people investigating the church, in my opinion. Okay, so now that we've talked about all the problems and how we got here and all the things we're up against, now let's try to solve it.
So I'm glad there's a solution. We're all getting so triggered. Landon's a pirate. I admitted I didn't have a door growing up. It's going crazy. Please bring us back home, Kendel. Help us. How do we solve it?
The answer is clear. It's patriarchal blessing, right?
Oh, no, God.
Oh, you know what? That was for another presentation.
That's
No.
even worse. Yeah. Talk about separating yourself from yourself. Wait a minute. I don't want to be this. Oh, no. God has told you that you have to be that.
And if you're not, it's
Yep.
because you're not righteous.
Totally. Oh yeah, that messes with your mind. That
Yeah, it
is a
does.
boundary violation. Yes, those
Yep.
patriarchal blessings. Wow. Okay, so here is my definition of boundaries. Boundaries are the rules or limits a person creates to maintain what is reasonable, safe, and permissible behavior, and how that person will respond when someone steps outside those limits. So these things, it's not easy to know what your boundaries are. You have to know, what your beliefs are, what your values are, what your opinions and which past experiences you want to keep and your social circumstances. Like you really have to do some self-discovery and some shadow work to discover this. But that's what boundaries are in essence. So here's a clip from Jimmy on Relationships about what this is all about.
Hey, can I talk to you about something? Yeah, what's up? I just wanted to get on the same page about the fight we had last night. Okay. And I know it takes two to fight, and I certainly want to work on making sure I'm not escalating things and I'm being respectful. And if you feel like I bring up things in a rude or critical way, then I have no problem addressing that. All right. But I'm just letting you know ahead of time that I'm not okay with being called names during a conflict. Listen, I got worked up. I said that in the heat of the moment. You know I didn't mean that. Well, regardless of whether you meant it or not, it's not okay, right? So in the future, once there's any name calling or yelling or aggression, I'm just letting you know now that I have to leave the room for 30 minutes. Do not follow me. I'm not being immature and just abandoning this. I promise I will come back and have this conversation. I'm just not willing to do so if those things are present. Hold on. So you're giving me ultimatums now? No, this isn't an ultimatum. This is just one of my boundaries. So you're trying to control me. I'm not trying to control you. You're still free to say whatever you want. I'm just reminding you that I'm also free to remove myself from any conversations where there's disrespect or contempt, right?
So this is your life. Like if you don't want to be treated that way, you have options of how to create that space and to let people know with respect, with love, with mutual concern. I mean, that was I loved most about what they started off with. Like, if you think I'm being critical or doing this in a way that you don't appreciate, I will address that. Like, responsibility is core to this, but there's just so many micro skills involved in this. Like, this is an ideal example. I know very few people who have the emotional intelligence to have this conversation right the first time. So I'm just telling you, just start with what you want and ask for it in a way that honors the other person. That's basically what I want us to take away from this. Any comments or additional thoughts?
Yeah, I find I get really flustered. I can start a conversation like that maybe, but then I just get flustered because again, I'm not good at it. I'm not good at, putting myself first in that way at all. So to watch that, that's incredible. I wish I could do something like that because I feel like the other person couldn't even walk away from that feeling hurt or anything because they were so honest about this is how I feel. This is what I'm going to do for me right now, and it's probably going to end well. I can see that I need to be better at things like that. And maybe just starting small, like you said, just saying no nicely to some things, maybe that's where you start. It depends on how deep you are in this, right? And I would say being raised in the church, being raised as a woman in the church, and somebody like me being raised in a family where we are all people pleasers, no one ever says anything about themselves. It's a long road. It really is. So what do you think, Landon? I thought that was really good, really educational to watch, actually.
Yeah, I never have a conversation like this. I just get flustered and,
Yeah.
kind of say two words, and leave.
Yeah. People do clam up, don't they? They tend to
Yeah.
get really quiet sometimes when it's, when they can't express it and they just feel really bad. And then if you're arguing with somebody who can really go at you, then that can be a problem. So yeah, boy, these dynamics are rough sometimes.
Yeah, I have another course that I teach about communication, and it's called Your Style Under Stress. And a lot of people that are socialized in this hierarchical system, their way of coping is to go inward and to clam up and to just, take it and move on and not, ever really address it. And again, like we have to re-socialize ourselves and get out of those habits. It's hard. Like I'm right there with you. Like if it's someone that's important to me, that I care about the relationship, like I think twice before speaking up about my needs. But if you remember nothing else about this entire presentation, remember this. This comes from Set Boundaries by Find Peace by Nedra Tawwab again. And I think I got it word for word, but it's healthy boundaries will never disrupt a healthy relationship.
Wow.
So
And that's loaded too, because as you start to develop boundaries, and if you have friends or a partner and you try to do this in a healthy way, and you can see that it's not going well, it could possibly be the relationship. And then that's hard too, because then you have to make decisions there too about friendships or whatever. So, but you don't ever realize that unless you start to be more autonomous, and try to express yourself. Because some people, I feel the dynamic is they like to be friends with people pleasers. You know what I mean? Because they can always, get what they want because you're with a people pleaser. And so that's hard in relationships when the people pleaser starts going, you know what? I think I have some thoughts and feelings of my own. That can be rough. That can change a lot of things. So this is a tightrope, isn't it, Kendel? You do have to kind of decide.
It really is. And to all the people pleasers out there, I'm speaking to myself as well. Like the price you are paying.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Is built up resentment. You are not happy in the relationship. You think that, you have this person in your life, but that resentment is eating away at your soul, like day to day. Like really, it has a cost. And you have every right to live freely, to live safely, to be treated with respect and deference, and your preferences and opinions and thoughts are equal. If you are in any relationship where you're not being treated as an equal, you really need to learn to start speaking up, because you are inviting that into your life, and that resentment is eating away at you. Just something to consider. All right, so more benefits of boundaries. So you don't overextend yourself as much. You establish better relationship patterns where it's mutually satisfying. You're not just satisfying the other person. You feel closer and more in tune with your values and core self. That's one of the biggest revelations as I've distanced myself from the church, is understanding what really Kendel is about, what he stands for, what makes him happy, what changes I want to make in the world, how I want to affect things. Like I'm getting away from this script of like, oh, you have to want this and do this, to wait, what do I actually want and what I actually want to do and accomplish?
That's why I think the new covenant path, and it is new, this thing did not exist prior to like 5 years ago. And I think we all took note when they started using that over and over. And now they're saying the covenant path reaches back to life before earth, right? The premortal life. You already decided to do things. You can't think about what you might want because you already did it in the premortal life. That's why you're here. And it stretches through life, and then it stretches into the next life. And you have already decided it's done. You can't set boundaries because you can't have your own thoughts or feelings. You've already done it. So you better live up to it. The covenant path is a very scary way to control people. If you really think
it's literally
a
chain around your neck. Like I was just appalled when I heard about Elder Bednar's talk where he said, no. It's not your choice to go on a mission. If you were baptized, you already made that choice. My eyeballs almost popped out of my head. The implications of that way of thinking is just, to me, extremely manipulative.
Yeah, I wish that Elder Bednar could wake up living the life that he wanted to live when he was 8 years old.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to be a plumber, and I wanted to be, and I was going to eat candy all day. And okay, that all sounds pretty good, but you know what I mean? An 8-year-old, the things that you promise yourself, that you say, I was going to discover a UFO. I was going to ride a spaceship, and I was going to live on another planet. That's what I thought when I was 8. Okay, the other planet thing is kind of in the church, but still, the idea that you're beholding to that as an 8-year-old, that you can never grow. You can never grow past it, ever. What parent would want that for their child also? Yet how many parents are encouraging their kids to stay on the covenant path? It's very frustrating.
Yes. But if you establish this, then you can safeguard all of that. Yeah. You can get respect and approval from the right people. Like, again, this was just devastating to me, but I realized how many relationships I had were purely based off of me being used. And I would get their approval, but it was conditioned upon me just saying yes and giving in and, pleasing them all the time.
Yeah, drop out of the church and see how quickly those people that you were trying to appease and make happy, how quickly they want nothing to do with you anymore.
Yep, you are a relationship of convenience, not a true friend.
Yeah.
Better control over your life, more able to focus on your priorities, better balance, better personal growth, self-discovery, improved health and happiness. But alas, with all these benefits, I have another clip.
Yes, a hideous rule.
A word of caution to this tale.
Excuse me?
Oh, whoops. Yeah, so I love that clip because this has such powerful potential to change your life and empower you, but all positive growth comes with some discomfort. So again, this is the solution, but as I promised you earlier, like it's not simple and easy. Like the church, I think, teaches this black and white dichotomy of like, oh, if you do the right thing, then everything's good, everything is white. And if you do bad and sin, then it's all black. It's black and white. It's one or the other. But everything is kind of a push and pull. There's pluses and negatives. You kind of have to decide. And what I'm about to tell you is very hard to do. You're going to have to expect more of yourself, assert yourself, take risks. These are not things people want to naturally do. But here's some things that I'll give you a preview of what I'm talking about. You'll have to learn to confront people who use you. You're going to have to end relationships that drain you. You're going to have to redefine relationships that control you or you've outgrown or aren't serving you. A lot of people don't want to even think about that. They just want to coast along and, that's your choice. But if you want the most out of your life, you really got to sit down and decide what you really want. If you say yes to everyone, then you might have an okay life. But if you want the best life, the people that you really want to give your time to, you got to be a little bit more discerning.
I like the part about discomfort because we're hardwired to stay away from that. But when you do that, you can coast for a long time in scenarios or situations which, are okay, but you're not really going anywhere. And it does take getting way out of your comfort zone for some people to make any kind of change like that. I can give an example. This is actually kind of an embarrassing example. When I was in college, my freshman year, I got semi-engaged, right? We did not end up getting married. In fact, we dated our entire college existence because it was casual and it was whatever, and it was coasting and it was status quo. It wasn't great and fabulous, but it also wasn't, there wasn't anything wrong. It was just what it was. It was, a date every weekend and somebody to study with. And I didn't ever have to really, put myself out there or have that discomfort or that awkwardness, And so I admit, looking back, that's what I was doing, just kind of sailing, And it was only when I got into my master's program and we were still just kind of hanging out and, we were like, yeah, we'll get married someday probably. But I think we both kind of knew that we wouldn't. So what were we really doing? And finally, the discomfort for me came when I realized I was almost 26 and in the church, you know what that discomfort is. I realized I don't think I'm going to get married, And in the late 80s, that's horrifying, right? So I took the step and I broke it off, and both of us were like, oh, okay. I mean, it was nothing, right? It wasn't painful at all. We're friends to this day. I know. But again, it was great. I had somebody to do something all the time. I had friends, roommates, study, college. There was no stress, no drama with dating or engagement, none of that. It was very casual. And that's why I did it. It worked. And it wasn't until the discomfort of realizing, if I don't change something soon, if you don't make a change, nothing will change is kind of what it is, And so that was it. I had to do it. But I understand that concept of just letting it ride with people that you're afraid to push your boundaries because everything might change. But usually when everything changes, it can be a good thing, even if it's rough at first, I think.
Yeah, it reminds me, and I've searched the internet. I think this is original to me. I've said this for about 10 years, but it reminds me of the quote, your friends aren't necessarily your friends. They're just the ones that got to you first.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But so anyway, we're gonna go over more hard things, but I promise that like these are the things that if you want to live life truly on your terms, then you're gonna have to master these things. So the first thing is we have to expect more of ourselves, hold ourselves to healthy boundaries, be responsible. So here's some of those things. So we and no one else are responsible for one, our feelings, our interpretations, our opinions, our reactions, all of them. We tell ourselves stories about things to make ourselves be in the best light all the time. I'm sure each one of us has done it multiple times today already. You know, some circumstance happened and we told ourselves a story because we're the hero in our own story. But we got to be more fact-based and be like, you know, the way I handled that or the way I reacted, like I could have handled that better. Like I need to have a healthier boundary with my reactions. Our attitudes, our goals and aims, how we show up. Like if we really are in a relationship and we're showing up with, you know, a lackadaisical attitude, or, you know, we don't really care about their thoughts and feelings, like that's not a healthy boundary. Healthy boundaries are about honoring yourself and honoring others to a reasonable extent. Like you've at least contemplated and considered the effects. You never, you know, actually make a decision based off of what's best for them if it's not also good for you. But you know, it's a give and take. Look for common ground, you know, mutual acknowledgement and shared problem dynamics. We take responsibility for our behavior. There's no more of this. So and so made me do this, or you know, is doing this to me, and that's why I had to do it. Like, okay, yeah, maybe there's a little bit of that, but at the end of the day, you need to wake up and be like, no one else is responsible for my choices and my decisions and my behavior. So yeah, your choices, including choices that led to whatever circumstance is giving you, you know, the problem at the time. You can't just isolate and be like, oh, this last thing happened, and so it's not my fault. Be like, well, you know, maybe if I would have had this habit and, you know, done this in my life, like I wouldn't be in this circumstance right now. A lot of people don't want to think about that. I know I don't.
This is tough love, Kendel. You're giving us
It
tough
is.
love.
It is. This is a hard one. If you want mutually satisfying relationships, whether in a romantic relationship or, you know, friendships, you have to really get in tune with your limits, what triggers you, what distresses you, so that, you know, you can have a hedge and let your partner, you know, be aware that, you know, these are things where I lose it when this happens. Like I can't handle XYZ or ABC, or I struggle with this. Like a lot of people don't want to be that vulnerable and admit their weaknesses and take responsibility for, yeah, I'm irrational when this topic comes up. Like we don't want to admit that. We don't want to think of ourselves as that, but we're all like this in some way or another. And if we are unaware of that, then most likely we're the ones perpetuating the worser problems in the relationship. We have to be aware of these things. Like we talked about in the Mark Manson book, like if we are confident, like that high confidence is highly correlated to delusion. So
Well,
we
that's
have
good to know.
yeah, we have to be aware of our limits and of the actual reality. Otherwise, we're probably contributing most of the problems. So what are our real skills, talents, and abilities, including, you know, our weaknesses? A lack of organization, a lack of thinking ahead contributes to a lot of relationship and boundary type situations. And we want to blame the other person and say, oh, you have to do it this way because that's my boundary. But really, if you step back and you were a little more organized and thought ahead, then this problem wouldn't exist either. You have to take responsibility for your contribution. This kind of goes into my marriage and relationship body of stuff, but you change it from, you know, blaming one another to, you know, we're both on the same side against the problem and we're both looking at our contributions to the problem. It's not your fault, it's not my fault, we both contributed. It's just a much healthier mindset to approach a lot of different things. And then finally, we have to take responsibility for our thoughts, our desires, our values, and our needs. And just as a side note, this is really tough in a post-Mormon and a Mormon context, I think. I've dated extensively, and I don't mean to put anyone down, but I just, I've encountered a lot of people in the church that I've dated that they don't know their needs. And so when I date them and I'm, trying to make it work and trying to make them happy, like they can't ever give me feedback of like, I want this, I need this. They don't know what they need. They just know they have this vague sense of, I'm unhappy or, something's wrong, but they can never pinpoint why, because they don't know themselves. They don't know what makes them happy. And we have to discover those things.
Is it, if you don't know, I'm not going to tell you, right? Which we joke about that.
Well,
but
you make a list.
yeah, exactly. No, this brings me to a thought that I had, because like I said, I was raised in a people-pleasing family. I was also raised in the church. I mean, in our family, for example, you're driving somewhere, I'm thirsty, I'd like to stop and get a drink. I don't say, can we stop so I can get a drink? I say, is anyone else thirsty? And I wait. And if no one else is thirsty, then we don't stop. But I'm talking, this is when I'm a kid or a teenager, but I would never say, can we stop? I need something. It was always trying to manipulate the scenario to get people to arrive at what I needed. And I see that a lot in people raised, the way I was, or in Mormonism, that you can't come out and say it, but you can sure learn how to kind of behind the scenes make things happen. You don't even know you're doing it to get what you want. And I think that comes directly from forgetting yourself, right? What Kendel just pointed out, there's no self. You can't express a desire, a priority, or a need, but you know you need something. So you find another way to get it. And that is a terrible habit. Instead of just coming out front and saying, can we stop the car? I'm dying of thirst. Can we go to 7-Eleven? No, I'm never going to say that. I'm going to say, you sure you're thirsty? I mean, seriously. Hindsight is 2020. My goodness.
Yeah, but if you know a little bit about attachment theory and what a secure attachment means for a relationship, you're gonna be authentic. You're gonna be okay with being direct because you already assume that the other person cares about you and cares about your needs. But if you're passive aggressive or go about meeting your needs in a roundabout way, that is proof positive that that relationship is not secure and healthy and open and honest. Both or one of the parties has dysfunctional boundaries or self-esteem issues or other issues, but they don't feel confident to speak up and be who they truly are.
That causes problems in LDS relationships, especially. That was a problem when I was leaving the church. Is I would make decisions and say, I'm not wearing my garments anymore. They don't mean anything to me. In fact, but man, my wife got really mad, that I was making a decision for me and not, and maybe there's a better way to handle it. But for me, I said, there's nothing to discuss. I'm, I'm not wearing these anymore. And I took them off. But for her, that was very, very difficult. So,
well, because they weren't your garments, you were taking off
someone
your
else's
potential to be a celestial couple, right? You were taking off your part of what she signed up and the reason that she married you, right? Because you're going to get to the celestial kingdom together. So I think that's the problem with, the mixed faith. It's not what you're doing for you. You're directly impacting the other person because that's how the church has set it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's so much in there. This kind of goes into my communication course a little bit. Like if you've made a decision, like any amount of better tactics isn't going to say like, okay, dear, I'll do what you want. But there are ways to make that message be more palpable to her, palatable, to her, like give her advance warning, consider her feelings, like say, is there any way that I can make this transition easier on you? Like there's just so many things you can do while at the end of the day saying, but this is my decision and I am going to do this, like honor self, honor others. It's a hard balance.
Instead of just showing up in a Speedo one day, Landon, there are other ways that
I was going to say, I tried to take them out real sexy, Like,
my eternal family.
That was a problem.
No. And you can't even joke because you hear this all the time. And it's devastating to people. And that's why you hear all the time on Post-Mormon Reddit, well, my wife, she told me it's okay if I don't believe, but I still have to go every Sunday and have a call. You have to live this fantasy. And then sometimes you'll see the same poster months later going, well, I tried that, but it didn't work, so that's a whole other podcast, isn't it? That's rough.
Yeah. But just a few more thoughts on this. Like, again, we're talking about healthy boundaries and other people's feelings at the end of the day are not our responsibility. How they react is on them. Like this list applies to them equally as it does to us. We should have and set those expectations. And it's like that visual that Stephen Covey has of like, you know, the monkey on our shoulder. Like we got to make sure everyone's monkey stays on their shoulders and we don't let their monkeys get on our backs and burden us. Like that's part of this. We don't take responsibility for their reactions. That's on them. Like their feelings are their feelings and their behavior is their behavior. Their reactions are their reactions. But there's a difference between being responsible for someone and being responsible to someone. There's a whole group online that's, you know, mixed faith. I actually, for my YouTube channel, Learned Empowerment, interviewed one of their facilitators. And that's one of the big things is like, look, you've made some commitments. There are things that are shared decisions, but, you know, you're not responsible for the other person, but you are to some degree. And again, like it looks different and you have to negotiate that. But there's a difference between being responsible for someone and being responsible to someone. That's the principle. All right. And that includes treating others as worthy of honor, which we already went over. Okay, so how do we actually discover our boundaries? How do we actually do this? Okay, this is hard. We've already talked about how hard this is, but the first step is tune in to you. Like ground your boundary and your values, what feels right to you, what you want for your life, that guards your most, you know, highest priorities, your treasures, your time, your money, your feeling, your dignity, your principles. That's the clues to discover what boundaries you need to be happy and thriving in your life. Like going back to, you know, there's not good emotions, there's not bad emotions, it's all just information. Whenever you feel hurt or angry or resentful or violated, those are the clues that let you know where and when and how to set boundaries. Start with, you know, just the most recent few times that you were disappointed or let down and see if you can find any patterns. And those are your clues of where to start making reasonable boundaries. Again, considering everyone's needs and what's right for everyone. Then decide what is okay with you. Honor self, honor others. And this is the hardest one for me. Like you really have to believe in yourself. Like you're making a decision, you're going to hold to it, be like, I need this to be happy. I want this to improve our relationship. You know, for my peace of mind, this is something that I am going to follow through on. Like you have to really be confident that this is what you want. Really believe that you're worthy and deserve better treatment. Be true to yourself and your priorities. And then be kind, but clear. The entire point is both parties knowing what does and does not work and the consequences. Like, you know, if you call me names, I will leave and not talk to you for 30 minutes. That sounds, you know, like a punishment, but it's really just protecting yourself. And if the other person isn't honoring you, then you need to honor you. You have to take actions into your own hands. You can only control yourself. So decide those things. And then again, this is another just super hard one, is you address violations as they come up. In the book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace, she goes so far as like, you know, each time you don't confront bad behavior, you're actually teaching them, keep doing this. I want this. This is okay. I approve of this bad behavior. Like you have to confront and speak up and give place and, you know, take back your power if they're ever gonna respect you, and you frankly respect yourself. No one else is gonna respect you if you don't respect yourself. So that's kind of the pattern. Any thoughts or comments?
Go ahead, Landon. I talk too much.
Yeah, I don't. No.
No, I think this is really good. And again, almost every one of these steps is really hard to do. You know, there's a lot to it depending on your personality type, and then when you throw a relationship dynamic with somebody else into it, you know, it can be really difficult. But I love these steps. Like I said, this is tough love, Kendel. It really is. You really have to look at yourself, check yourself, be willing to speak up. But it's for the good of relationships. You know, it's for the ultimate good and for the for each person. So
yep. And again, trying. Like most self-help gurus like don't say this, but this is where I'm at right now, is like, if you can't follow through on this, if you want to keep with the dysfunction because you just, don't want to speak up, like you are gaining some benefits from the dysfunctional behavior. Like, don't be totally hard on yourself. But if you want something better for your life, I'm here to tell you this is the way. It is hard. It's uncomfortable. You're going to have knots in your stomach before you do it. But as you get used to it, it will get easier and it will be better. And like I said before, if you remember nothing else, healthy boundaries do not disrupt healthy relationships. If you are confident that you need something to be happy and the other person responds poorly, you got to really reconsider if that person has your best interests at heart and if you want to continue investing in that relationship. I know that's hard to hear. We want to have everyone like us. We want to have all these relationships, but that's just the facts.
Well, I was going to bring up that I had read an article a week or so ago about, and this has to do with generational relationships and boundaries, perhaps with parents, grandparents, people that are much older, maybe different, very, very different from you. And this article said that a lot of elderly parents are having kids say, my boundary is I can't talk to you anymore. I have to step back, or you can't see the grandkids. And it's leaving a lot of these older generation going, what happened? I don't understand. I don't know what I did. Is there consideration that you take for someone's ability to even understand? I mean, I know you still have to do self-care, but this article is really sad. It told stories of some of these, parents, probably, 10, 15 years older than I were, whose kids they couldn't understand why. And the kids were just gone, literally gone, of a certain age where everybody's asserting boundaries and being autonomous. And they're just like, nope, can't do it. So I don't know, is there wiggle room when it's somebody that may not understand, an elderly person? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we actually have a whole clip about that, and it has
good.
to do
Okay.
with your audience and knowing their maturity level.
Yeah, that's it, kind of.
So we'll go over that.
Like, I think of some of the things my grandparents would say. It was outdated language. It was, talking about World War II. They'd say some things, and it's not like I'm gonna say, you know what? Because you were in World War II and you're using that slur name for Japanese people, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go, it's Grandpa. You know what I mean? So I don't know. There's
that goes right into our other recommended techniques. So number one is kind of, I call it the importance number. I use this in all my relationships, and it's really weird at first to most people. Like, my last two girlfriends were like, this was so weird at first, but it actually changed my life, and I use it all the time now. So I just ask him, like, from 1 to 10, how important is this to you? Like, oh, I'm an 8, I'm a 6, then it's a lot easier to make a decision. So, like, is your 80-year-old grandma not using that word really a 10 out of 10 for you? Like, really?
Yeah. That makes sense. And you weight your probably family relationships a lot more important. I'm going to bend over more backwards for my kids. I'm going to give them more leeway. I'm going to let them treat me not as great as I would somebody else just because they're my kids. So that's very interesting. So the number means, okay, how important like your relationship is with them. And the more important it is, does that mean the higher the number, the more you might let things slide or put up with things? Or is that kind of how we look at it? Or
yeah, so like in one relationship that I have cut off, I've said, like, if you don't consider when I say, hey, you hurt my feelings, if you don't have a follow-up conversation with me when I say that, like, that is important enough for me to just step back from the relationship. Okay. If you're not willing to do that. Like, if you do not care about my feelings and respond when I say, hey, I need to talk about this, then that's a 10 out of 10 for me. The relationship
is a 10. Yeah. That not the relationship, but the action, whatever happened, you're saying, this is so important to me, 10 out of 10. I'm willing to, but if my grandma did something that she didn't know was rude, but I thought it was rude, I'd go, yeah, it's a 1. She doesn't really know. So,
but here's really one of the quirks with humans is we have something called a negativity bias. Like, there's even a more specific version of this. Oh, I forget what it's called. I want to say it's, oh, dang it, I forgot. But it's an eponymous law. I have a whole list of these funny laws of human psychology. It could be a whole episode, just quirks of our thinking.
I'm writing it down as we go.
But it basically is like we have this just human urge to emphasize negative things a lot more than positive things. So, like, this relationship with your grandma could be 98% fantastic and wonderful. But just when that one bad thing happens, we just naturally react and be like, oh, that's so bad. I got to shame you and attack you and stop this. And really, that one bad thing, it is bad. But in the context of the relationship, it's not that bad. But it just in the moment feels so big because we have this negativity bias of like attacking and reacting so much. And again, going back to the mixed faith marriage group, this interview that I'm going to put on my channel, like the number one technique that she says helps couples is to just slow down your reactions. Like if you can just withhold that initial like, grandma, you're a racist or whatever, just like give yourself another 5 seconds and then react. Like that is her number one recommendation for healthy relationships is slow down that initial reaction. So that's actually number 2. Respond, don't react. Slow yourself down. In the book by Chris Voss, he's a worldwide renowned, top negotiator. Oh, I could give a whole class on this. It's about when you talk to people, think of it as a stage play. Like how the tone you take and the things you say to a person, like you're taking on a role and you're giving them a role. Like if you accuse someone of something, then like you're taking on the role of like a judge and they're taking on the role of like the accused. And that's going to set the tone for that whole conversation. Like how does someone who's accused naturally react? Like they're going to defend themselves. Like you are literally encouraging resistance by the words and tone that you take. And most people aren't aware of that. So again, if we just slow down and we say, I want this person on my team. So instead of accusing them, I'm going to say, hey, I need your help. And you're giving them a different role. You're giving them the hero role. You're going to have them be the hero to step in and save the day. Be like, hey, this happened. I don't really know what to do. Like, do you have any idea? Like, it just completely will change your life as far as how you approach conversations and communication. So stances and roles, and think of being conversations as a stage play. Try to keep it about you. Accusations rile people up. Instead, use I statements. I feel this when this happens. Try to be as objective and don't use, loaded language as much as possible. And then I read this whole book by Bill McGowan, and I didn't remember much, but I remembered this. This is the only thing that I really truly remembered from this book called Pitch Perfect. And he's like, if you want an equation for good relationships, this is it. Fairness, honesty, and empathy. If those 3 things are present, then it's a good outcome. So like with your grandma saying that slur, like if you really put yourself in her shoes, you really empathize, does that word mean to you what it means to her? Or is it really quite different? Can you really put yourself in her shoes and understand where she's coming from when she uses that and her thought process and the attachments and ideas and feelings that she has with that word, and how they're different from yours and how that should affect how you feel about that. Like in relationship, we don't really take that time. We're like, I didn't like this. I want this. And we are not going to put myself in your shoes. I want this and you're bad and I'm good. And that's when we have all these problems.
Yep. It's complicated, right, Landon? That's what we can say about it.
People are complicated for sure.
People are complicated.
They are. All right, so we're wrapping up here. These are just the last few thoughts. So here's that clip I was telling you about of like, well, what happens when, this person doesn't react well and they don't understand? Well, here's a good principle from the psychodynamic coach from Instagram for us to hear.
When someone you love routinely steamrolls you, twists your words, or guilt trips you into compliance, it's tempting to believe that all of these relationship problems would resolve if you just explained your position more eloquently, if they could just see reason. But here's the hard truth. You can't argue someone into emotional maturity. No amount of logic can force someone to develop the empathy, the accountability, or the healthy relationship skills they don't have. Emotionally immature people struggle to view disagreements objectively because those disagreements threaten their very identity as someone who is good and right in all ways. They'll use deflection, denial, and coercion to avoid any vulnerability and maintain control. So instead of winning them over, you end up drained from over-explaining and reeling from their gaslighting, now second-guessing your own reality. Instead of bending yourself into pretzels, trying to be understood by someone who's emotionally immature, save your energy, accept their limitations with compassion, but refuse to shrink yourself just to make them more comfortable. Let go of the fantasy of changing them. You can't. Instead, refocus your energy on honoring your own needs, setting clear boundaries, and redefining your relationship with folks who aren't emotionally mature enough to meet you where you are.
It's really hard to say because I especially want to say like, well, I understand this, so like the other person should respond the way that I just learned, and I'm going to teach you how. But I have to learn, like, a lot of people, like, this sounds so dumb, but like I was 37 years old. I'm 39 now. I was 37 when I realized, like, wow, some people just don't care. Like, I care so much about so many things, Rebecca and Landon. Like, you already see it. Like,
You can tell.
I like a lot. I learn a lot. I have my hands in a lot of pots. I read a lot of books. I summarize them. I just want the world and everyone to be better. And I was 37 when I realized, like, a lot of people, they just don't care. They just don't care. They have other priorities. They don't really care about knowledge or helping people. Like, they're still good people. They just have other passions and other priorities. And it sounds so dumb, but it's true. Like, we have to realize that other people are totally separate and different from us, and that's okay. And we have to meet them where they're at. And I think where this matters most in a post-Mormon context is, again, I don't mean to offend, it's just my opinion, but I think the church infantilizes people as far as their emotional maturity. And so, like, this whole presentation was largely going to be about, in a post-Mormon context, how do we set boundaries with people? That would probably be too long, so I just went over general stuff, and we can apply it to that. But just, I think that's particularly relevant, is the expectations we have when setting boundaries with people still in the church, because I think they do operate just on a very superficial level. And, you know, they answer questions like, you know, what does the Spirit tell you? That's a non-answer. You're literally not answering the question. You're just postponing the problem to some ephemeral thing that's, you know, a feeling. You're not really reasoning or thinking critically at all. So you just have to kind of adjust your approach. And there's one of my good friends, and she's still in the church, but she's, you know, questioning. And, you know, she has a real hard time with boundaries and saying no. And I've kind of coached her through some things. And I told her, like, well, you know, one of the things you can tell them is, I've had personal revelation that I don't have to do that. You know, like,
Can't argue
meet
with that.
them,
Right.
meet them where they're at. Like, what rationales and beliefs are they operating under, and use that in a language that they understand and will respect, you know, like, that's just, you know, emotional savvy right there.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a generational problem too. And I've heard this discussed before, where you have the infantilization that happens by belonging to a high demand, high control. Then you have people getting married when they're teenagers, having children when they're very, very, very young. A lot of kids are raised by very young and immature parents. And, you know, it's just kind of a cycle. You have just certain attributes and certain things the way you're raised just because your parents were raised that way. Your parents were that way. Their parents were that way. And then on top of that, you have the church not encouraging you at all to grow beyond loving Disney, right? Beyond being like a 75-year-old person who goes crazy over Disney. I mean, it's interesting. This is a thing that the world is starting to notice. I've seen several titles. Why do Mormons love Disney so much? And it's hard to explain, but it is that infantilization. It's a safe thing for them to watch. And it's just remaining childlike with maybe not the best qualities of being a child.
Yeah, that's a
It is
very
interesting.
good connection. I think you're totally spot on. Those things are definitely correlated because, it is kind of watered down. It is simple. In fact, I've read dozens of marriage books and how, that contributes to very poor satisfaction in marriage. Because like, I'm gonna blow the statistic. I can look it up later, but it's something like when interviewed about what an ideal marriage should look like if the interview goes on long enough, like the N reaches almost zero point 0.9, which means 90% of people mention a Disney movie as part of like explaining what an ideal marriage is like. Like these are the ideas that are in our minds, just like so watered down, so simplified, so in this fantasy world, but it's simple and it's easy to grasp. And so that's kind of how we unconsciously are setting our expectations. And I think that's spot on. That like
were you
Disney
looking
is
for
safe
Cinderella,
and
Landon?
Yeah.
Exactly. Is that what it was?
I was never a Disney fan. In fact, I abhor Disney. The happiest place on earth. I'm going. You stand in line 90% of the time. This is not my idea of the happiest place on earth. So I've never been a Disney fan, and so I this. But I see it everywhere around me. I'm just surrounded by it. 23-year-old kids. Oh, well, let's go have a movie night. Let's watch. And they watch a Disney film. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
But it's so appealing to the infantilized mind because there's a
Right.
clear good usually and a clear evil. And like it just goes into our biases and it doesn't really challenge us that much. Like there's so much appealing to Disney. But I'm glad you pushed back on it because it does, keep us thinking on a superficial level for the most part, I think.
I think so too.
All right, so just to wrap up, your words let people know where you stand and thus give them a sense of the edges that help identify you. I don't like when you yell at me gives people a clear message about how you conduct relationships and lets them know the rules of your yard. The next presentation, I have this whole metaphor to visualize boundaries as a picture in your mind, and it's all about your house and your yard and keeping things inside of there that is good for us and not letting other people control us.
This
So,
surprises me because most people really love to be yelled at. So, this would be surprising if someone would tell you that.
Really? You think people love to be yelled at?
I mean, can you think of one person who loves to be yelled at? I don't think you would even have to say that.
Exactly. No, people don't get it though. They
I
really
know.
don't. And again, you have to turn it around to yourself and say, I don't like it. You can't say, don't yell at me. You have to say, I don't like it. I'm speaking for myself is all,
Yes, and when it happens, I will do this. That's the pattern.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to end up, your rights, I deserve to have a safe space. Again, like I'm assuming if your audience is anything like me, they're mostly, if they struggle with boundaries, are not really aggressive, really assertive. They're kind of on the spectrum where they're people pleaser. They just, want to go along to get along. They have a hard time speaking up. I'm speaking to those people right now. So you deserve to have a safe space, and your boundaries allow you to live free of unwanted drama and unwanted monkeys on your back. You have spiritual self-determination. If others comment on your worthiness or salvation, you can choose to not have that be allowed in your space. You can confront that and do something about that. Oh, this is my favorite one. Your desires and preferences are just as important, just as worthy, just as in need of respect and worthy of respect as anyone else. You don't have to put yourself subordinate ever again. And any relationship that forces you to lose yourself and what you want as being, less priority should be renegotiated. You are worthy of respect and dignity when you show you're serious about these things, like you'll be safe to open up and make a change. You can say something like, I can't be close to you until we work this out. Like that works in a romantic relationship, a friend relationship, a family relationship. Like if you want to stick up for yourself, that's something that you can have in your mind to say.
I feel like when I read these, it explains to me why I broke up with the church. Honestly, each one of these things were something that wasn't going right for me in the church, especially having your own spiritual self-determination, meaning, other people were determining and asking you about your worthiness all the time. But all these reasons here are reasons that you finally say, I break up with you, LDS Church, because it's not healthy we don't use those words. We say it was no longer healthy, or it was no longer working, or my inner conscience. But right here, I see it's because of these things. I was getting none of these, or allowed to have none of these. I had to break away.
Yeah, and this might be a little off topic, but it kind of makes me think of something I just recently learned, where it's like the doctrines and expectations of the church are broad enough where, like, no matter what the topic is, the church can find some angle to justify what it wants, number one. And like we said earlier, like, turn any topic against the individual. Like, it's just, there's so much said, and they can choose to emphasize one part at one time and another part at another time, that it's like going in circles. And this is in the bite model too. I can't remember the term I'm getting at, but you know how it's just so broad, and then like whatever, takes up the brethren's fancy at that time is like the most important thing. But then, just like 6 months ago, it was all about, food storage. And like, I thought that was righteousness over there. It just messes with your mind, because really it's an unhealthy boundary. They are saying, no, the most important thing right now is the covenant path. That's what it's all about. That's what the church is all about. It's like, well, wait a second. President Hinckley said it was all about, education and all these other, like, I'm so confused.
Now that you say it that way, think about this, Landon, the steeple doctrine, where the local leaders in Texas came out and said, you guys all remember, right, that the most important part of our worship is that really tall steeple. And people who, like Nemo, drew a boundary. He goes, that is a hard boundary. That is not true. I know that's not true. I'm flying to Texas and I'm going to talk about it. So if you look at that in terms of boundaries, that was something that finally people could say, nope, I'm drawing that boundary. I know that's not real. And I'm going to say that. Other people were like, yeah, I was that. Yeah, you're right. I know that.
Yeah, they would cry in tears,
about it.
Like, the steeple makes me feel close to God.
Yeah,
all of a sudden it was a big part of their personal identity. Like, they allowed themselves to be co-opted by this new narrative.
Right. And told what your narrative is. So there you go. Wow. I never thought we could combine boundaries and temple watching, but we did it, Landon. We did it.
Yes, we did. Okay, just some other things I wrote down. I will say no to things beyond my capabilities. I will never emotionally influence another person for selfish needs. I won't tolerate lies or deception. I will not allow anyone to disrespect me or take me for granted. I will not play savior to people in distress that's of their own making. Like, just list your values, list the things that give you meaning, that empower you, and stick up for those, and you'll be living a better, more energized, more authentic life. Some other reminders. Do either of you want to read these?
You do it, Landon.
Okay. Reminders for empowered boundary setting. Setting a boundary isn't to change people's behavior. It's to assert your needs. You can't control how other people respond to your boundaries. You're allowed to change your boundaries over time and across contexts. You're allowed to tell other people what you are and aren't capable of giving. You're allowed to have boundaries that look different than other people's boundaries. You're allowed to have needs that look different than other people's needs.
Yep. So just give yourself that grace, that space. You're a human. That's another thing, leaving the church. Like, I wasn't allowed to have like weaknesses, like I was someone who had to do the right thing and, present and have all these accomplishments. I thought my worth came from my accomplishments, like just all these things. And now I'm like, I can change my mind, and I can want something one day and want a different thing, and it's okay. And it's just, it's such a sigh of relief in my life.
It is. And it's so arbitrary in the church, because I know so many people, especially men, your worth is your calling, right? If you're not moving up, if you're not becoming the elders quorum president and then the counselor and the bishopric and then the bishop, you have no worth. And yet it's completely arbitrary. You're just waiting for somebody to pluck you out of the sky to do that. And then you feel worthless when it doesn't happen. Where on the other side of it,
someone in my family, their whole self-worth is wrapped up in the idea that, like, oh, I wasn't a bishop.
Yeah. I know people like that too. And they're devastated. They're devastated until they finally walk away and go, you know what, I can choose to be whatever I want to be. I don't have to wait for somebody, inspiration, or just old boys club, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that's all part of that. You have to give yourself permission. So wow, very loaded.
Yep. Okay, one last video. Again, this goes over.
What were we going to say, Landon, before the video? Sorry, I think
I was just going to say one thing with boundaries in the church is it operates just like boundaries in the church. They set all the boundaries. How many times have you had your ward boundaries redrawn around you and you're going, I like where I'm at. I like going to that ward house. I like my neighbors. I like going to church with them. But you don't get any of those choices. They draw the boundaries, they set the boundaries, and they change the boundaries to work for whatever works for them, while giving you no say in the boundaries whatsoever. They don't care about the boundaries and how it affects your life. And that's a clear indication, wait a minute, I should have a say in the boundaries of where I go and which building I go to and what time I go to church and all of the other things that affect my life. But in the church, you have none.
Yep, and that goes to what we were saying earlier of, you know, the bite model and control and high demand. Like, is there a public forum for feedback, or is it just edicts from on high, top down all the time? Okay, anyway, so one final video. This kind of goes into what we were saying earlier about like harder edge cases, as well as just an overall summary of what we've been talking about. So Jimmy on relationships, one more time.
You can't set a boundary with a narcissist. It doesn't work. Well, they don't need to agree with your boundary in order for you to enforce it. But they aren't going to listen. That's my whole point here. I think we might be getting confused on a boundary versus a request versus a command. A boundary isn't, you can't speak to me like that, or even, please don't speak to me like that. A boundary is, if you speak to me like that, here's what I'm going to do. If you yell or call me names, I'm going to leave the conversation for 30 minutes. It's not about controlling them at all. We don't have control over what they say or do, right? But we can all agree that we should have control over our response and our reactions and how much access of ourselves we decide to give to another person, right? But they're just going to say that I'm punishing them. I mean, it seems kind of rude to just walk away. Isn't it funny how we're so concerned about how our words are going to affect them? We don't want to do anything that's seen as rude or disrespectful, right? And yet they've never once considered how hurtful and disrespectful and punishing their words and actions are to us. Good point. I mean, when we talk about boundaries and communication, it's easy to think, well, that doesn't work with narcissists. Exactly. But it was never supposed to. Narcissists have no interest or capacity for mutual respect or consideration or empathy, right? Right. The question isn't, do those work on a narcissist? That answer is clear. The harder question to answer is, how much of my time, energy, and attention am I going to give to someone who has no desire for safety or emotional closeness or reciprocation in this relationship? I still think the only thing that works on a narcissist is going no contact. You want me to blow your mind? Going no contact is the perfect example of a boundary. They don't have to agree with it for you to enforce it.
I just love that. I just love that on so many levels. But just a good reminder of what we talked about. And then I found this meme online. I loved it. If you can't handle me at my worst, you probably have healthy boundaries, because you don't have to tolerate that behavior. You have a choice in your life, and it's really, really freeing. All right, next time I'll talk about the 4 types of boundaries, the 5 flavors of people pleasers, and how to break the cycle, how to say no with grace and tact, consequences for boundary violations, a visual way to apply boundaries, and 3 tiers of response escalation for boundary violations. So there's so much on this topic. I've read so much, and I just, there's too much for one presentation. But if you invite me back, that's kind of where I'm going to go.
Yeah, we talked about it, but it's going to take 2 parts to do this because it's really important. I mean, I think Mormons and post-Mormons, I think we're really bad at boundaries, no matter how you slice it. And I don't think it's really our fault at all. But I think it is something that we can start today to do something about and end up more healthy and more satisfied on the other side. So that's why this is so important. And we'll make sure in our show notes, you've mentioned a lot of things, Kendel, and you've mentioned your channel and all that. We'll make sure we have links, because everybody always, like I said, they always say more Kendel, right? Like, we need more cowbell. We need more Kendel. So we'll put all those links in the, all right. We'll put all those links in the show notes for sure, because this is really important to talk about. And, you know, there may be some people that have never even thought about boundaries or don't know much about it. And I kind of was one of those until I started digging in and paying attention to what you were saying and realizing, wow, I think I have some work to do just on the side of, you know, sticking up for myself a little bit more, because I really don't do that very
all do,
much. Yeah. I mean, I let my dog boss me around, it's like we're all like that. So anyway, no, this was just great. Landon, do you have any final thoughts? And we'll let Kendel go.
I appreciate it. It's healthy to know and to set boundaries and to enforce those. Church does it all the time.
Exactly.
You can't go to another ward. You're outside the boundary. So push
Yeah.
back and say, well, my boundary is this. So
That's right. Yeah. But you know what happens when you assert your own boundaries at church? It's very difficult. Like you brought up the example of the woman that said, I'm not going to accept in calling now. I have a lot of things going on. And they don't know what to do with people that say no. And that's usually the first step people take. When you say no, it kind of shocks everybody and makes everyone realize, okay, there's something going on here. So it's important, I think. So excellent. Any last final words, Kendel? This is great. We love having you on and we can't wait to have you on again.
Yeah, no, just thanks for the opportunity. And yeah, look for more in things that I'm going to be posting soon.
Yeah. And is this at the end, this is your channel, right?
Yeah, so my channel, if you do at Kendel C, that's my YouTube channel.
Okay.
And it's going to have, like I said at the beginning, just my journey right now is just cataloging all the things, beliefs that I think work better than Mormonism. That's basically.
Wow, that's a task, because that's going to be like
a large
everything.
binder.
Yeah. A giant barn bigger than Mitt Romney's binder. That's right. So is and I'll read it out loud for our listeners, www.learnedempowerment.com. That's your website where you're kind of collecting all these different things and putting them out there for people. I love it. You're finding everything that works better than Mormonism did to help all of us move forward. So this is awesome. Kendel's such a valued friend and such a find for the podcast. We love him in the book club and we love him on Mormonish. You have such a great presentation style and you make hard concepts easy to understand, and you make people want to learn more. I think that's the important part. People can give a lecture or a presentation and people are like, okay, I learned that, file it away. With you, we're left going, well, I got to find out more about that. I remember that one thing he said, there's a lot, which is good. I bet you were a great institute teacher.
I loved it. Yeah, I was told I was Elder Holland level.
Oh, you got the Elder Holland stamp of approval. There you go. Well, this has been great. And please comment, everybody. How do you feel about your ability to enforce boundaries? Or are you like, maybe you're like, what's a boundary? I was raised in the 70s and 80s. There's a lot to unpack here and a lot to comment about. And we definitely want to hear.
Yeah, yes. One thing I'd like to ask of the audience in the comments, like boundaries is about context and specific circumstances. I'm trying to develop a model of like how to differentiate people that are ready for more honesty and authenticity, and some people you have to be kind of superficial to. Like how do you make those distinctions? How do you tier the people that are ready for what types of boundaries, if that makes sense? So just what people can you be that vulnerable to, and how do you differentiate what they're ready for?
That's great. Be part of Kendel's research. Let us know in your experience of trying to enforce boundaries. Have you found times where you're like, okay, this person is not ready? This is great, because if there were a way to kind of assess up front, you would know how to react and maybe not make a mistake or damage a relationship, but do it in the right way. So this is great. Comment anything you want to say about boundaries. We appreciate it. So please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And there are always links in the show notes to Donor Box. We appreciate everybody that makes donations. You guys are just fantastic. What do they always say in Mormonism Live? Keep the lights on. We need some kind of tagline. Keep the ring lights on. How about that, Landon? Should we say that, since I have like 25 right here? I probably need a new one, 26. So we also have links in the show notes to our merch store where you can pick up some Mormonish merch if you'd like. And again, thank you so much, Kendel. You are a favorite reoccurring guest. And thank you, Landon, for co-hosting. And we will see everybody next time, especially part 2 with Kendel. We're not going to let it go too long before we hit part 2. We'll see everybody next time on Mormonish Podcast. Thanks, all.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.